Hello, 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 anyone? Alright. Well, I'm going to get this going here. My name's James Brundage. Been doing mini painting now since I was 12. So good 20 years now. We're working on Celestine today. Brought an example of one of her Gemini just to kind of get an idea of what we're looking at. Hey, hey. And really get into some painting gold techniques, a lot of washes and stuff. I'm going to be muting the camera in between when I use a hairdryer to kind of get these washes going, or else I'm going to slap down a wash and sit there for 45 minutes and watch it dry. I know everyone's really excited for that. So probably go for hour and a half, 2 hours till she's done, and go ahead and get going here. If anyone has any questions about what we're doing here, or any questions on color progressions or anything, hit me up on that. Any questions on my process, my palette? Let's see what we got. Alright, so we got her. They had a handy little spot here in the back side of her leg where we were able to attach a toothpick and do her separately from her cloak, which is going to get in the way, and her wings, which is also going to get in the way. And this whole thing is like a big rocking horse on the two little attached spots for her base. So it makes it really difficult to paint. So I decided to just stage it out. And with the gold, we're going to start with a wash of Restream Flesh Shade over the whole thing. Keep it nice and light. Can always go back through and do another layer if we choose, or if you want it darker. And then we're always going to be bringing it right back up to a nice gold in the outside after everything is done here on the higher surfaces. So, found recently that I really like Restream Flesh Shade over top of Retributor Gold for doing a nice bright gold. If you want a dingier one, you can obviously go with something like Agrax Earth Shade, or even Null Oil if you want to go even darker. If you don't want to, I always like to base the model in the colors that I want to start with, instead of having to go over this. If you don't want to dump all the cash on a can of the Retributor Gold spray or similar ones, you can probably go with priming it gray or black, and then getting a bigger brush and going back over with Retributor Gold right out of the bottle.
Will people get mad because there is no swearing in this?
No, there's just. Wait, let's get drinks first.
Yeah, drinks, so that we can do spit takes.
No, we're not going to make a mess of your fun.
Once we get this to dry, we're going to be bringing the gold right back up to a little shinier. And kind of switch off between this and her other stages, her other sub-assemblies here. Kind of hit it again one more time let it pull up in some of those recesses if we really want to get a little bit darker. We're going to start by doing all of the armor on here first, and then coming back over to do the smaller details. That way we don't have to try to paint some of these details, like the spots on her shoulders and this kind of corset looking thing across her chest or midsection, or the tabard or anything like that, and then have to mess that up just by going back over and doing the armor again. Alright. Gonna let that dry. Grab her wings here and do the gold section on those so that can dry, and then we can get back around to doing that a little bit later. So thanks. Yeah, I'm probably gonna go until about 9 o'clock today. A couple hours, figure hour and a half. See how much of this I can get done, maybe even finish it. I will be muting on occasion because I brought a hairdryer here just to keep things going. I think I already mentioned that, but definitely don't want to have to wait the full duration of this thing drying. Alright. Pop this over here on the palette. Everyone's kind of got their own style of doing things. Probably for the past 5 or 6 years I've been using a wet palette. Absolutely love using the wet palette. Really saves on paint. It keeps your paint to a nice consistency. If anyone has any questions or anything like that, pop in the stream about how to do these, or if you have any other ideas. But notice that painting has changed immensely since switching over to that. So go ahead and really do our best to avoid the white on her wings. I've always been the type where if I don't have to go back over and paint it again, especially if it's a really weird color like yellow or gold, or sorry, yellow or white, if I don't have to touch it again, I won't. Yeah, wet palettes. So this right here, it's just your regular old Tupperware container, sandwich container. You can do it right on the lid, or you can do it right inside of this. I've just been used to working inside of the container. Take a couple paper towels, cut it to the bottom of that one, and then you go buy some baker's parchment paper and cut that to the same shape. Pop that down in there, dump some distilled water in there so it doesn't get all funky with you over time, and that's pretty much it. You let it soak, push down the parchment paper so it sticks down to the bottom of the container, and dump out all the excess water. Maybe pat it dry with a little paper towel, and the parchment paper slowly lets water come up over the surface and kind of keeps re-energizing the paint. Makes it really easy to wet blend and blend colors together. You can, take a couple different colors on here and toss the colors together, or create a gradient and work off different parts of that gradient if you're really going for really nice blending transitions and stuff. You can get more advanced with it. You can get real simple, but the nice thing is when you're done, slap a lid on it and come back next day. I've had this one. I changed out the parchment paper on this one yesterday just for today, but I've had one single sheet in there last month maybe. So, while you're working on here, especially if you're trying to get into some fine details and you're slowing down a little bit on the model, you're not going to come back to dry paint and have to go get more out of there. Saves on paint also. but this part's going to take just a little bit of time because we're really trying to be careful on this edge of the wing without getting it on the white part. If you make any mistakes, I got a little bit there, you can always go back around with either a wash and kind of get some like Drakenhof Nightshade, like a blue wash or something like that, and kind of get it in that recess, and that'll cover that area where it mixes like that. Or you can cover it up with kind of an off-white. I tend to find that stuff like ceramite white or the different white paints have a really difficult time covering, and then you keep putting on layers because you're worried about covering, and then it starts getting kind of chalky and smudged up, and then you just kind of start really having problems over time. So I use something like Uthwan Gray, which is pretty much off-white. It's really, really close. It's kind of hard to tell just by one look at it, and I pretty much use that for white, or come back over that with a little bit of skull white, ceramite white now in a base, just to kind of highlight it, and that makes life a lot easier. So we're going to go ahead and get this gold trimmed on here. I'm going to load up a little extra on the palette because it's just going down a little thick. Once we get this done, we'll come back through with the Reichsland Flesh shade and get the shade going on this, and then we can move back to Celestine and start on the armor with this Retributor Gold again. Spend most of the time really being careful around these edges. This white's going down a little thin, so I'm probably going to have to go over and do another layer here. For anyone watching, pretty easy to see in here. I know I'm working with like light gold and white and all this light that we got going on here. From what I can see, it's a little hard to see, but it's what we're working with. Water it down a little bit more. Doesn't have to be perfect in here, especially with all these little kind of pipes and areas that we're going to come back and paint silver. Just focusing most on avoiding the white wings, because we could come back and clean those up, but I'd really rather not. these real fine areas, notice I stop every once in a while, even if it's a little bit more, takes extra time, but basically going back over there, kind of getting the brush going again, always twisting it through to keep that really nice point on it. Because the second it starts to kind of fan out, we'll start going in areas where you didn't intend it to. You always want to keep that brush control going. Right, we're about halfway there. Take a look at it after we're done and see if we have to do a second coat over this white. It's looking a little thin in some of these areas behind here. I, for one, cannot wait to try to transport this thing. And the way that some of this stuff has had to glue together, this one's attached with a little hose, being the most fragile thing that I've ever seen, next to some of the Age of Sigmar stuff. Just finish getting along these edges here. Once we get this done, check in on how Celestine is drying. If it's still got a little bit more time, maybe go over and start working on her cloak and doves that are attached to that. Let these dry up. It's kind of the nice advantage of moving, doing a couple different stages of models. You just move between each piece. Definitely become a bit quicker over time, and see if we can get these things done in an evening or two. Just about there. Not gonna make it. A little bit more. All right. So that takes care of all of the gold on there. I'm going to go ahead and let that dry so it doesn't happen to bleed down onto the wings or anything. Set that aside. Celestine is pretty much dry. There's still a little bit of pulling here in the back, just kind of how she's on this handle. I'm going to give her a few extra minutes, move on to the base part here. Set her over here. Alright, again, I'm doing my best to keep this thing still, but as you see here, it really likes to, it's just attached on these two pieces here, it really likes to move around a lot. This looks super fragile. They were kind enough to attach it via one little tail there. The inside edge is white. I'm going to keep it white on the model, so I'll probably just do a little bit of like a light gray shade in there. Mix some gray down with a little bit of lamy and medium, maybe a little bit of wash. And just stick to the recesses, let the upper areas alone, and then do the tapestries or the seal. This big purity seal that's attaching her to the base, and a wash over the birds. So I'll start with the red on her cape. Again, with this, thinning everything, especially these base paints, they get on pretty thick. Over white, might need a couple coats, but the end result is way worth it versus just trying to slop this stuff on there. See if I can't kind of brace it. Again, the goal here, really do our best to avoid the other side of this, where it's white. Come through here to the edges of it first, as carefully as possible. Pick a brush that you can keep really nice point with. with this red, starting off with corn red as the base. Give the whole thing a wash in Agrax Earthshade, and then bring it up with a little bit more corn red on the outside of the recesses, and then Mephiston red. Evil Sun Scarlet, Wild Rider red, maybe a highlight of Tau Light Ochre. That orange kind of puts a nice highlight edge on red sometimes. Doesn't make it look too orangey if you keep it small. Sticking to that edge, keep it nice and neat. Take our time on the edges here, through the back side of it. As the time spent fixing it will be way more than if we went a little bit slower here. Again, this model really seems to be like what can we avoid here as we go. Try not to get it on this purity seal again, because those are going to be painted over with some Reikland flesh shade after some Rakarth flesh. And again, don't want to have to fix red on that either. So. Again, if anyone has any questions about any process here or what we're doing or what might be interesting to paint next, post it up. just about done with this part here. And there's going to be a small, little detailed freehanding part on the underside of this cloak that we'll get to later with a really fine detailed brush. Probably do that before we attach her, because it's going to get in the way of pretty much anything that we're trying to do underneath this cloak as well. Alright, so now that we got that, I'm going to come by and check the edge here. Let's see if we can kind of clean that up a little bit. Water down some corn red. Do our best to brace it. Get that edge. Doesn't have to be perfect right here in the underside. It's kind of where it connects to the back side of the model, so you're not really going to be able to see much here. So once we get that attached, probably just drop a little bit of wash in the seam to kind of cover up any differences between white here and gold on her. So alright, so we want that to dry. I'm gonna do a little bit of a glaze over the birds. They kind of have this bluish green tone to them, which, if anyone's watched any like the Duncan videos or anything on how he does the armor for Ideneth Deepkin, it's this kind of blue-green silvery armor. It looks real nice. Same thing for like Grey Knights. Start with some Colia green shade. Dump that on our palette. A little bit of long and medium. Get that down on there, because Colia right on top of white will really stain this pretty dark green, and that's not exactly what we're going for here. So right over top of the birds here, gonna stain them like blue. You'll notice it's really staining them now, so we're going to grab a little bit of our water and kind of just mix that right on the surface of the model, and it'll start kind of causing that to pull up in the recesses there and push a little bit more of the white out underneath it. But really do your best to kind of coax it into the recesses there. Again, it's definitely more of a subtle wash, so you don't want to grab your biggest, largest, wash brush and just, or shade brush, and just really slap it on, or you could probably put a little too much on there. It gets a little too heavy on you, and then it makes getting the effect that you want on there a little bit difficult later on. So now that we have that on there, this part on our cloak should pretty much be dry, so we can go over that with some Agrax Earth shade. Take that shade straight out of the pot, no mixing down or anything, and just get it right on the red. And we're using a fair bit of it. Let this go pretty dark and then shade our way back up with red. I find that goes pretty well. when you're painting red. I actually get made fun of a lot for having too many red armies between Blood Angels and Eldar. Everything's red. But hey, if you get used to painting something a certain way, stick with it. Alright, so now we got that wet. The doves are all wet. I'm actually going to move back to the wings really quick, get the wash on those, and then we'll start working back on Celestine and spend a pretty good chunk of time working on that one now that the main wash on her is dry. So back over these wings, some ranks and flesh shade. Okay, and you can probably see you'll be very, very careful when you're near the edge of the wings. You can see there we had a little bit of areas where it was touching the wings, and then we let that wash kind of slip into that recess there between the gold and the white, and it makes a pretty nice line. So you can come back in and later on, and it's already kind of neatened up for you, and you don't have to do it again. Again, you really don't have to worry about too much about what we're doing here in the middle. Let this wash really define all the gold areas, and it kind of gives you a little bit of detail to see what you're doing when you do the silver parts. Make life a little easier so you're not just trying to pick something out of a gold void there, essentially. So we get a pretty good example. I kind of flubbed a little bit right there, got a little bit on the white. That's no problem, we'll come back through afterwards with some Ulthuan, and then maybe a little bit of ceramite, and just kind of patch up the mistake. These really fine areas, definitely keep the wash pretty light on the brush. You don't want too much on there, or it's really going to run off on you, especially with all these little flat surfaces. And then we're going to set this back down, let it dry, really think about where these things are going to pull, which direction that they're going to pull up once we set it back down. So I'm going to lay it down with the gold side down so it doesn't go run down the white wings and give us more problems. So gold side down, just like that, let it dry. Let's get back to it with Celestine here. So for our gold armor, see how good it can come through on the stream here with the type of light that we have, but we're going to be working with, now that we've washed the whole thing down, a little bit of Retributor gold, or Retributor armor on all the larger surfaces, Liberator gold on all the edges again, and then Stormhost silver as the finest highlight that we got on the armor of the edges to really bring that out. And then we can even come back through. You can mix down. I like to mix down a little bit of Agrax Earthshade with some Rhinox hide brown, make it really watery, and then paint that into the lowest recesses to really push that shade down into gold. Tends to work out pretty nice when you're doing that with metallics. You could even do that with non-metal metallics, but I figure that would be a really slow process, especially for something like this. So I'm just going to take a smaller brush than what I had before. Switch back over to Retributor, and now we're just going to carefully, without hitting the recesses, really think about where the light's going to be hitting the model, especially on some of these upper edges, and then pull our brush away from those. To cover the more flat areas. But avoid the recesses. Here we're just kind of looking at how light hits it. Focus on getting that nice edge highlight. Kind of let the wash work for you. And clean up the armor as we go. So you see there the leg's already done. As far as that one goes. Alright, so let's hit the other leg. Doing the very edges of the toes. Hey, hey. Yeah, it's a lot of gold paint. Alright, we start to get into these areas here where it's really fine detail. Thought they did a pretty nice job on this model, especially with the old Sisters of Battle look like. Really hoping the new line that they might put out next year looks anything like this, then probably in for a really nice looking army. Again, we don't have to cover everything. Definitely don't want to, especially with that wash kind of giving us a pretty nice shade into the lower recesses of the armor. Just focusing on the edges, any big open flat areas, and anything that when we look at it would kind of be an area where light might kind of hit naturally on the armor. With the different pieces and parts and hoses and the sword and stuff, it'll break up pretty nicely once we start moving into other colors. For now, realize this looks like a big gold blob. See if we can't maybe move in just a little bit more. Alright, so that pretty much handles that layer right there of kind of taking off where the wash hit everywhere on the armor. Now we'll move up to Liberator Gold. It's a lot lighter. You don't want to do too much of it. Less is more on this one, or you'll take kind of that warmer armor and throw the whole thing really light. As you work on this, when you start focusing on the really small areas, it's not going to look like much. It's going to be a pretty subtle change, but I think overall it makes gold armor pop pretty nicely. So again, stick with a brush that you can keep a really, really fine point on every time you paint a piece of the armor. You pretty much switch back over to the palette, refresh the paint, spin the brush around a little bit more, keep that real fine point. Pick a few areas here and there where you might want some a little bit more of an intense shine. You could do a small little dot, so say like the side of this hip or something like that, maybe some lights coming off from the side. You can pick a small area and just kind of work inward, outward, working to the outside, and create a little bit of a light reflection there. Come back here next to the detail there. We're going to be painting that silver and white later, so come back in here. Try to hit these, do an edge highlight here on the armor on our feet. Don't worry if you hit some of these really small recesses here, because we're going to be coming back through the shade, dropping it back down into there. That's the kind where we were talking earlier, where we mix it with a little bit of Rhinox High to kind of cut the opacity of that shade and give it kind of a hard edge. And these lighter colors that we painted in here will really pop out. It's always been one of those models that we really want to take our time with. Anytime we have her in the game, she's usually pretty much the focal point of what's going on. So figure a nice showcase job will really make her pop out, stand out from the army. Just at the top edge of this knee. Come in here on the area around her neck and her chest. The edges of her arms. And that pretty much does it for the gold until we do Stormhost Silver to really highlight that, but we're going to wait until we come back through and do the other silver details, and we'll highlight those at the same time. So the backside here real quick, kind of hit those with some light details. Alright. So we're going to do the same thing now on the wings that we just did to her armor. A little bit quicker, not nearly as much to cover, just focusing on the upper edges of the wings. Kind of let the shade do its thing. Hit the edges there. Kind of move back, compare it to the gold that you've done on her, so when you glue it together they match. Really get that shine on the upper edges here. Pretty much the highest point of the model, so kind of want to assume that's where light's hitting it the most. And then you get pretty decent transition here between the shades that we already have and some of the highlights. It'll really pop out once you we come back and do some Stormhost Silver, but those are just going to be in very small spots just to kind of make that really shine. So while she's drying, I'm going to move back over to the cloak. Just kind of keep this rotation going here, leaving the recesses alone that we've already gotten all that wash into. Come back with some corn red from the base. Paint that into there, but very lightly feathering out, nice and light to the edges here. Kind of bring that nice bold red back out that we covered up with the wash. You want to keep this pretty thin down. We don't want to cover up the areas that the wash is shading. But there aren't too many instances where we're just putting a wash down and that's the end of that. That's that. That should dry fairly quickly. We watered it down pretty well. Oh, cool. Hello, Argentina. Alright, so after that we're going to go move right on to Mephisan Red. Is the type of red, blood red that we all love and know. It's nice and bright. Move that right up and go right into the edges here. Keep it really, really, really watered down. I like to say almost the consistency of milk. You'll see it kind of start to shrink back up on the palate a little bit. Not too much, but you'll know that you get a pretty good consistency when it does that. It dries really, really, really transparent. So you might need more than one coat, but I think that the end result is worth it, as it gives you a really nice bold red, especially contrasting right with the white on the other side and the gold on her. So really try to make it a point on most models that have predominantly gold, like our Stormcast that we're working on now. Mine are mostly silver, but even when you have that metallic, to pick a color, blue or red or something like that, that'll really pop out. How much you avoid the recesses and the edges, or how many different levels of red you want to do, or your highlight you want to do, is up to you. It just depends on how much you want this to kind of pop out, how clean you want it to look. No, they're not made with a 3D printer. They're injection mold. They're plastic. Multi-part plastic kits, Games Workshop, Warhammer, and then they're on sprues, cut up, glued together. Probably have more of them at home than what my wife cares me to have, but what are you gonna do? So there's that part right there. You saw we really left the middle part alone here with that red, and kind of came back up as we go. I'm just kind of looking at those parts that really stick up and out. It's a lot of motion in the cape, and the smoother you make these transitions on the fabric, I think the more it really pops out. Thanks, Ben. Giving it fun for all the red armies that I have. So you see here we were talking about wet palettes earlier. You know, we have 3 different shades of red here. You could, if you want, wet blend between the 2 of them, and then steel paint from all along that gradient, work that into the model, and get a nice transition going. Just keep these together here basically, just for ease of use. But we're going to come back through. This one's going to be really quick. This is the Evil Sun Scarlet. It's more of an orangey red. You don't want to use too much of it, or it gets really orangey on you. Unless you are going for an orangey red. When you water running down your paints, again, you got to watch, they can get a little loose on you, so just be careful where they're pulling up and keep it moving. And then when you notice that it's kind of stopped, the later parts of the paint that you're moving around, to stop at a higher point or an area where you want it to shade up to, and that's where stop and keep moving on. So there's that. Again, throughout this whole thing, really being careful to not get the underside of that, because I don't want to have to fix red paint on top of white. So yeah, that was one fast hour, so see how much we can get done this week. Alright, so now we have Wild Rider Red. The figures for Warhammer 40K, familiar with it? It's a board game. Some people play it just for the hobby of building and painting these. Some do a mix of both. I like to do a little bit of both. Trying to work through my backlog and find more time to game. Really take this stuff, we'll focus on a very fine edge highlight on the edges of the cloak where it's billowing upwards. It's pretty orange You don't want too much of it. This does well to really focus on the fine edges that really come up. Same theory really goes for any color that you're doing here, especially with your lighter greens. You get like a yellowish, you're trying to paint this green, you have a more of a yellowy green where it comes up. May not seem like it's kind of a natural part of that palette, but until you get it on there, you'll notice that it kind of forms a pretty nice highlight. Last thing we do here, a little bit of Towelite Ochre. Kind of a brownish yellow. Thanks, take care. Really focus this on a small part if you're going to do this part of it. You can really kind of wreck all of the different highlights that you've been doing if you do too much of it. I like to just keep it to the very edges of things. But you start to notice it puts a pretty nice highlight on that. And there's that. The finest highlight is Towelite Ochre. Oh, that's nice and backwards. But that does pretty well if you're doing brown up to those things like well, as Tao's traditional color, it's in the name. But also puts kind of a nice highlight on yellow. I've tried to use like Fire Dragon Bright out of GW's line, some of those more orangey ones, and it seems like it's a little too orangey. This one, the yellow, I just put that right on top of the red, and it gives it that kind of a stark highlight. So after this all dries, you can kind of see a little bit of the areas where I don't want to see any transitions in between the red paint. I want those parts of the cloak to be nice and smooth. I'll probably come back through with either Carroburg Crimson or Agrax Earthshade, mix a little bit of that together, mix that with some Lamy and Medium to really lighten it up, because I don't want it to affect too much the colors that we already put down, but put that over the whole thing and let it dry, and it'll take all those different colors and really blend them all together. So, all right, so we'll take a look at another look at the doves here. We're trying to go for that kind of bluish color. Now that we've already done 50-50 Colia green shade, Lamy and Medium over top of all that, going to go back over it with Gilman glaze, the blue glaze. This is what we would also do for the Ideneth armor, the silver, to get that blue silver armor. Did the same stuff for some Grey Knights recently, and it came out pretty nice on top of the silver. So get a little bit on the model, and then grab some water and mix that in. Let it pool up pretty good. This glaze dries really light. So what we're going to do is we're going to get it on there, let it pool up, let it dry, kind of shade this thing down to a nice kind of greenish blue, kind of subtle, and then we'll go back through with Ulthuan Gray and then a little bit of ceramite white at the end of that to bring them back up to white. with that kind of blue highlight underneath it to give you a real nice crisp color. So just to keep things moving along, I'm going to mute here really quick, snag the hairdryer, dry this up, and we're going to keep on moving. Alright, didn't want to subject you to that. I'm going to grab some Ulthuan Gray and a really fine tip brush because we're going for the feathers of all these birds on here. Mix that up on our palette. I have some leftover Lamian medium sitting here. I'll drag that into there. And keep it nice and thin. You don't want it to get too thick. So we're sticking to just painting feathers here. Just do the edges in here and then kind of feather it up. I'm going to do a little bit of a kind of a stipple across the back here. And that'll give us kind of a light shade on these. Really between each area, make sure to keep refreshing your brush when you're doing these really fine highlights. It's really easy for your brush to start to dry out or for the bristles to kind of splay out on you, and then you start getting a little inaccurate. Every time I check the clock, I keep thinking, probably not going to finish this today. Just a little bit of a time-consuming model. kind of hard to tell over the camera. If anyone is wondering why not just dry brush it, the details on these things are really shallow, so a dry brush would probably just cover up everything, all the recesses and whatnot between the feathers. Don't want to lose the shade that we already got between the Collier green shade and the Guillemot blue. It's a pretty subtle thing to work on, but in the end, at least I think that the effort's worth it. Two more to go. I want to keep moving in the direction of the highlights here. Anywhere where they use the birds' heads to attach to their tails. So really want to try to keep it away from there so you can still define that area. So you can still see the head, so it's not just surrounded in a bunch of white highlights on the other bird's tail. This one's going to dry a little bit grayish as we go, and then we'll fix that with some ceramite afterwards. Some really fine highlights. That should bring these right out. You especially want to use those near the areas where they attach, just to show a little bit of the difference between the different birds. Now, if you're not really thinking that you're going to do showcase, or you don't want to do the finest highlight on these things, the highest level of detail, you can probably spray it white, grab a little bit of the Guillemot blue glaze, mix it with some Lamy medium, and over the whole thing, let it dry, call it a day. And that'll give you a pretty light highlight on there and still kind of show some white birds. Maybe come back through and do their beaks and stuff. Now we're going to go ahead and start up on the bottom side of them. This is an area where you can maybe take a few liberties here and just kind of go lightly across the bottom of it. Don't need to highlight too much. spend a pretty good amount of time pretty much looking at the front of the model, so it's up to you. Alright, come back through here. The wings, mostly focus on the part that's facing upward. Let the shade kind of be on the underside of the bird. Maybe hit that front edge of the wing a little bit in the tail, but pretty much call it on that one. Okay, so there's that. There's our backwards. There's our birds. Backside shaded a little bit. It's pretty subtle, but you also kind of want to be careful when you're dry brushing with these ones, not to do too much, too heavily, because you could just straight up break the model. Again, this is one of those things that I really worry about transporting it, or how that's going to work out, just because a little piece of plastic about that big is all that holds it together. But with that, take a little bit of ceramite white. Mine kind of dried up a little bit on me, and I prefer it that way. It's pretty thick, but it makes for a good dry brushing white. We're just really going to mess up into the paper towel there. Come back through. Take your time. And the more you hit it, the more of a nice subtle highlight you're going to get on them. So there's that. While that dries, and while that's done, we're going to move back over to Celestine, snag up a brush, and we're going to go ahead and do all the silver details on her now that the armor's done. That way we can get those done, hit them with some non-oil shade, and then go back over with Stormhost silver, a really light silver. Highlight the silver and the gold at the same time. Mostly just hitting all the tubes, this big hose coming out of her cowl. Do that in silver. keep this fairly thin. There's a nice collection of them on her back. That's pretty much up to you if you want. It's going to be covered up by the wings. Could kind of be the equivalent of painting the inside of a vehicle and then gluing it shut. Yeah, you'll never see it painted, but you know it's there. Again, we did all that work earlier on all the gold armor, so this is another spot where you probably want to be as careful as possible to not undo any of that work that you just did. Not too many areas on her. Going to be silver, those hoses, the parts of her knees, her sword. Sword doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to be coming back around in a little later stage and doing kind of a lightning effect on the power sword. I'll go for another 20 minutes or so here. Okay, so there's that part. With this one, there's also some cloth, some armor in between her arm joints, mostly here and here at her hips, right in front of the tabard. We'll hit that with some red too. And some areas on the backside there. Also, again, covered up by her wings, but up to you if you want to do that. You know it's there, you'll know it's all done. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some Reichland Flesh Shade, or I'm sorry, Rackar Flesh, base color. Does pretty well for fabrics, really thick, covers really well. Get some of that down on our palette here. Okay, we're doing the kind of the creases in her armor with this, so you want to really want a brush that you know is going to hold a nice fine tip. And then we're just going to start right in there. And kind of keep turning the model so that you're not having to paint over the areas where her armor already is, and hit that with this. Again, it's pretty light. If you catch her armor like I did right there, you'll probably never notice, and that's something that we'll clean up again when we come back through with the Stormhost Silver. But we're going to be dropping some Agrax Earth Shading on top of this to kind of shade that fabric. And while you're at it with this, since this makes a pretty good coverage paint, we're going to go ahead and cover up her face and hands as well with it with the flesh before we come back in with some other flesh tones that would otherwise be a little too opaque, and you'd actually see some of that gold through there. come back in, make sure that you're really turning the model and making sure that you get her hands and skin pretty well. Any areas that you miss will show up pretty well when you go back through with some lighter skin tones or to cover up a wash. And just be careful to not catch her armor too much. Like I said, you want to use something that kind of mark my brushes and stuff, and just remember ones that do really well for you when you're keeping a fine point on them. Again, we're gonna get up in there. It doesn't matter if you get her hair at this point. You really want to keep your paint thinned down really well with water when you do things like her face. The details around her eyes, nose, mouth, they're really shallow. If you paint even a little bit too thick, it'll cover all those details right up. And a really focal point of the model won't look exactly the way that you would like it to. So again, it's okay if you get her face or her hair. We're going to be going back through that, do with a black paint after we do her face. Again, when you do that part, just keep in mind to again be really careful to avoid the face that we took all that time painting. Definitely going to do the hair after the face, just because of all the different shades and stuff that we're going to be trying to do to get in there and define all those features on her face. Also, any of the wings here on her knees, this part on her shoulder here, any of the floors on her, I'm going to be doing those in white, and a pretty plain white, so we'll cover that in Rack Our Flesh as well. To take that metallic kind of dinge off of all the parts that aren't going to be. Hit those wings on her shoulder as well. Maybe doing those in white. We'll come back in and do the gem. Maybe in purple or something, another color that would probably go together pretty well with the gold and red and white. I'm going to carefully hit that fleur on her armor there. Really tiny details on these. And same for the ones on her legs. As well as the strap that goes around her leg. We'll do that in maybe like a black or a brown, like a dark leather. And then just just do really quick the flowers. We're going to be bringing those up to white later on, and then adding a wash over them, like a Carolbrook crimson and stuff, to kind of get a pinkish look on those. Okay, so now we're going to come through and do some shades over top of all that we just painted. Again, I'm going to mute really quick, hit it with a hairdryer, save some time. Thanks for the heads up. Yeah, pretty much went in this with this whole grand idea here for the gold, or to get this done, and 2 hours later, just have all this gold done. Probably about 3 or 4 different layers on that to kind of get that to pop nicely. It can look pretty flat without it, or unless you like using the gloss washes. So what I'll probably end up doing today, a little bit of time left, is go back through with Stormhost Silver and do a real fine highlight on some of the edges there. And we'll call it a day for today. And then maybe pick up a little bit later on this. So with the Stormhost Silver, really just barely in some of these areas. Only really where you want the finest highlight. Keep it light, keep the paint real thin. When you're looking at it in some of the larger areas, kind of see where a large or where light would hit it, and then just maybe put a small spot of silver right there. So like right on the edge of this, or the edge of her leg right there. Maybe put a small spot there and drag a line down. That'll give you a pretty decent highlight. You don't want to do too much. Again, with this is another less is more, or you've just gone over all the gold that you've done. I'll pretty much take out the last hour and a half of work that we've put into this. Kind of go over to the side here. Over there. Some silver on the edge of her feet, all the way down to the toes. I'm going to do silver on these fleurs that are here. We already going through there with the brown. Let you just hit the top edges of this, and it already really makes it stand out. Again, now we're going to the top of this. You get this part here that's raised up. Light's really going to be hitting it a lot, so we'll just put a small little point there, kind of drag it up to the side. Do the same thing right here next to the fleur and the edges of her armor where it kind of pokes out here on the sides. For this one here on the underside of this collar. And then really want this to kind of show a nice line between her armor and her face. So we'll probably put a full line of it there. On the edges of her shoulders. Now what we're going to do for the sword, I'm just doing the outside edges, because if anyone's looked at the artwork or the stock photos of this, she's got a little bit of a power sword looking effect going on the flat edge of that, and I really want to kind of retain that with a lightning effect. So I'm not really going to worry about painting that too much because we're just going to be going right back over it. I don't want to waste too much time on that. Overall, pretty happy with the outcome of the armor here. Maybe a little bit of a highlight on this hose here, but that pretty much takes care of it for her armor. It's pretty bright, and the silver highlights came out pretty nice, at least for what I'm going for. And we're actually going to do the same thing to her wings. Got some of that Stormhouse silver, really only on the top edges and parts here. Grab that, drag a little bit of a line, but let it kind of fade off there into the middle. Start to the other edge. Mostly just focusing on that really fine edge there. Again, this is going to be the front side of it, really the part that you just get to see the most. So I want to try to give that a really nice highlight there. And again, with these metals, just remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can kind of miss a few spots here and there, and it'll just kind of look like it's picking up on a highlight. You can drag a few highlight lines over. And there's that. It kind of gives you a nice little highlight on the edge of her wings. Kind of makes that gold pop out right below the white, and we didn't really roll down into the white too much. These areas here where I kind of messed up and got a little bit of wash bleeding down, you can take some of the Ulthuan gray right here, as you see, and just lightly go in, correct yourself all the way to the edge, and you can pretty much fix that area up there. So with the edges of that one cleaned up, I already have a fine point brush out. We're just going to go ahead and do the edges of her wings in there. Use a little bit of Drakenhof Nightshade, some blue, mix it up on our palette. You don't need much of this at all. Want to use a little bit more limey and medium than not. Then I'm going to pull a little bit of water in this thing to even thin it down even more, because all I really want to do is just keep it into the middle of these things. So we're going to start up at the top here. Let it run. Grab a paper towel. If you have anything, any imperfections or anything, it's okay. Okay, really, anywhere that isn't the edge of this is going to show. So I actually want to go over to a brush that holds even finer of a point than the one that I had out. Working with a really fine point brush here though, but again, if I don't have to go back over the white, that's a win. You could even just rub with the edge of your finger there. And then again, any little parts that you have here that you don't want to be this kind of a whitish blue shade, we can clean up with Ulthuan Gray. So yeah, there's that. It looks a little bit kind of frayed and messy when you first do it, just because, I mean, the finest of a fine point brush, it's such a shallow, small little recess that you're trying to put a shade on between white wings that I would go back through again with some Ulthuan and clean up that highlight. Or you definitely find it easier working like away from yourself on this one with the top of these things facing. And just kind of be patient, take your time, fix up any of the areas that bled over. Just keep running your brush away like this, avoiding the recesses that you just did so you don't have to go back through this again. Probably end up coming back through here again later with an even thinner version of the wash. and getting into those recesses to really make those lines kind of stand out, since it's such a large open area of the model. A pretty clean area there. I want that to look pretty smooth, so this one will definitely take some time. So I thought I'd really show that one a little bit. I'll get to the other sides in another one another time. But yeah, really just anything to kind of separate those wings there. Alright, so I think we'll wrap up today by doing the centerpiece on her and her tabard there with some red and black, and that'll about do it. So we'll start with the silver down the center here. We'll start in the center, work our way out. Grab some corn red, and there's these two center areas here. It's okay to be a little bit messy going outward, because we're just going to be covering that up with black. But really being careful to not get the silver on the inside or this gold on the upper edge of it. I have that out. Get to do the tabard in here again with the gold on the legs. It's kind of plain operation. And not hitting what we've already done. And then once again for the red here on the tabard part, we'll go down the progression of reds. Again, since it's cloth, to really give it that nice kind of shade that you want to get and keep it, you know, kind of looking believable that it's made out of cloth, and not going to have the same type of highlights as you would on the gold armor where the light hits that and kind of reflects off of it a little bit. Lastly, I'm going to snag some Abaddon Black. Pop some of that on my palette here. While we've got that out, I'm going to do the grip on her sword. In between her hands, like right up where it meets the sword, right on the underside. And then now avoiding the red and going around the sides of her body. Another thing with black paint, black likes to really be transparent. Probably have to come back through and do a second layer of it. Really being careful here. It's a pretty small space to try to work in. I'm going to come back through the edges of the kind of this corset thing that she's wearing are metal, so I'm going to come back in and do those in silver. Carefully on the back side, you're really not going to see this part. It's going to be hidden behind her wings. And trying to work within all these different tubes. I'm pretty much going to let that go. And do a second coat. I'm going to dry this. Now that that's dry, a little bit of Nuln Oil in there to shade down that centerpiece with the red and all the silver. Can even bring it over into the black. It's not really going to be too noticeable, but it'll shade that down a little bit. We'll come back over this with the red tones that we did on her cloak, and then work with a couple different series of gray up to Ulthuan gray on the black to put a little bit more of a realistic highlight on the leather. All right, so that pretty much does it for the center of her, save for some highlights and all the gold armor. There are still some small details in the different straps and stuff around her legs. Doing white on these crest parts here, doing white on her shoulder, obviously coming in and do the details and the skin tones on her face. Pretty much takes us to the end for today. Lots of very small details with this one that we're trying to do in a pretty decent amount of time. Spend most of my time, with the smallest brush that I have, really busting out some of these spaces that are kind of in these deep recesses here. So I don't know if anyone has any questions or comments so far, but might pick it up another time, maybe in another week or so, to finish the model, finish all 3 different parts of her, glue it all together, and call it a day. So pretty much takes care of it for today. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it. And have a good one, everyone.